Hi, I'm Kaylin. I bought that beach condo with every ounce of my savings, thinking it would finally make me feel like I belonged in my family. But the day I walked up to my own front door, my mother spat at me. "This is your brother's house now. Stay out." They handed my home to my addict brother without asking. And when I protested, my father hurled a shoe at my face like I was nothing. I stayed silent. But that silence? It became the one thing they'll regret forever. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop it in the comments and stay with me, because what came next turned their lives upside down. I'd been staring at the condo for a full minute before I even stepped out of my car. The Gulf air was thick with that mix of salt and seaweed, and the orange glow of the sunset hit the white stucco just right, making it look like a postcard. My condo, or at least that's what I thought. I'd worked late nights, taken on side projects, cut out vacations for years to buy this place. Every time I came here, I felt like I'd done one thing in my life for me. I climbed the steps with a tote bag full of groceries and some new towels I'd picked up on sale, feeling proud of myself for finally setting aside a weekend just for me. But the second I reached the door, it opened before I even touched the handle. My mother stood there, Lorraine, her lips pressed into that tight line I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. But this time, she didn't just scold or sigh like she used to when I showed up unannounced. No, she spat out words I never thought I'd hear from her. "This is your brother's house now. Stay out." For a second, I just blinked at her. My ears rang. "What are you talking about?" Behind her, leaning against the entryway like he'd been living there for years, was Elric, my older brother, the one who couldn't hold a job for more than a month. The one who had taken out loans in Dad's name and never paid them back. The one I'd bailed out when his friends left him stranded with nothing. He grinned at me. Smirked, actually. "Surprise, Kaylin. Guess who's the new owner?" I froze. "You're joking." Lorraine crossed her arms. "Your father and I decided it was best. He needs a stable place. You're doing fine on your own." Fine on my own? My jaw clenched. My hands were still full of the grocery bags, but my palms itched to drop everything and shake some sense into them. "This condo is in my name. I bought it with my money." "Not anymore," Elric said, almost singing the words. "Mom and Dad signed the deed over to me last month." I laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Signed it over? Without asking me?" Lorraine didn't flinch. "It's family property, Kaylin. You've had enough time to enjoy it. He needs it more." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I'd heard of people being cut out of inheritances, but this wasn't even inheritance. It was theft dressed up as charity. I stepped inside, past my mother, forcing her to back up. My heart pounded so hard it made my vision blur. "Where's Dad? I need to hear this from him." Elric shrugged. "In the living room. But he's not going to change his mind." And there he was. My father, sitting in my armchair. No, his armchair now, I guessed. Flipping through a TV guide like it was just another night. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't just hand over my condo without a word to me." He didn't even look up. "It's done. He needs a place, and you've always been too busy to be here." I dropped the grocery bags onto the counter, hard enough to make a bottle of wine clink against the granite. "You had no right. None." That's when it happened. He stood, slow at first, then grabbed one of his old house shoes from by the door. And before I could even brace myself, he hurled it at me. It caught me on the shoulder, more shock than pain, but it still made me stumble back. "Don't you raise your voice at me in my house," he barked. My house. The words were gasoline on an already burning fire. Elric chuckled. "You heard him. My house now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to claw back every penny I'd put into this place. But instead, I straightened my shoulders, walked to the counter, and picked up my keys. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "Fine," I said, my voice so calm it almost scared me. "Enjoy it." And with that, I walked out. The drive back was a blur. The sun had dipped low, turning the horizon into a smear of purple and red. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt. Every word they'd said replayed in my head, over and over, like a tape I couldn't turn off. My house. He needs it more. You're doing fine on your own. The churning Gulf waters beside me seemed to echo my insides, restless, furious, ready to swallow anything in their path. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I'd walk away without a plan, and the plan began forming the very next morning. I didn't sleep much, just dozed off here and there while staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elric leaning in that doorway with that smug little grin. My mother's words hit me in waves. "This is your brother's house now. Stay out." They didn't even bother softening it. It wasn't just a condo anymore. It was proof of where I stood with them. At the bottom. By 6 a.m., I was out of bed, pacing my kitchen in my robe with a cup of coffee I didn't even taste. My townhouse felt smaller than ever. Every corner reminded me of how hard I'd worked to get here. Late nights, skipped holidays, living frugally just to buy that beach place. And they handed it over like it was an old piece of furniture. I finally sat at the dining table and pulled out the old lockbox I hadn't opened in years. The one with every important piece of paper I owned. My hands were steadier than I expected. I wasn't just going to stew in anger. I needed answers. It took me almost an hour to dig through everything. Purchase agreements, loan statements, insurance documents. And then I found it. The property title. Except it wasn't mine anymore. My name had been replaced. The date of the transfer hit me like a slap. 2 months ago. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering, trying to process what I was seeing. They didn't just decide this yesterday. They'd been sitting on it for weeks, smiling in my face like nothing had changed. And then I saw the signature line. My father's name. Underneath, in fine print, it read, "Power of attorney, on behalf of Kaylin Mercer." I froze. That wasn't possible. I hadn't signed over any rights. And then it clicked. Years ago, after I'd been hospitalized for that surgery, I'd signed a limited power of attorney so Dad could handle a few bills while I recovered. I'd forgotten all about it. They hadn't. I whispered to myself, they used it. They actually used it. As if that betrayal wasn't enough, another envelope caught my eye. Something Elric had left in a pile of family documents. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It was a debt notice. Not one. Several. Credit cards, personal loans, all in Elric's name, past due. My stomach turned. They hadn't just given him the condo out of pity. They were hiding it from his creditors. I needed to hear it from them, even though I knew how that call would go. My mother picked up on the third ring. "What now, Kaylin?" Her tone made my skin crawl. "You used Dad's power of attorney to transfer my condo to Elric, without my consent. Do you know how illegal that might be?" A pause, then a sharp laugh. "Illegal? It's family business. You don't understand, Jan. Your brother needed help. That place was mine. You knew that, and you still—" She cut me off. "You were never family like Elric was. Be grateful we gave you a roof when you needed it." Her words hit harder than the shoe my father had thrown. Be grateful. Like everything I'd done for them. The bailouts, the late-night calls, the holidays I sacrificed, meant nothing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and said nothing. Let her think I'd accepted it. "Are you done?" she asked, irritation dripping through the phone. "Yeah," I said flatly. "I'm done. I hung up before she could say anything else. For a long moment, I sat there staring at the wall, listening to my own breath. I could feel that old version of me, the one who walked away, who stayed silent to keep the peace, clawing at me, begging to stay quiet. But I couldn't do that anymore. I opened my laptop and pulled up my contacts. I still had the number for Amanda Lewis, an attorney I'd worked with on a corporate project years back, smart, relentless, and someone who owed me a favor. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then I started drafting an email. I didn't know how long this would take or what it would cost me. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They thought I'd cry and disappear. Instead, I started building my case. But before I could strike, I had to face the memories I'd buried for years. That evening, after rinsing out my coffee mug and staring at my untouched dinner, I found myself sitting cross-legged on the floor of my hallway closet. I'd pulled out an old banker's box, one I hadn't touched in at least a decade. The corners were frayed. The masking tape that once held it shut had dried and curled like brittle leaves. Written on the side, in my Aunt Vivian's graceful handwriting, were the words, "For Kaylin. Keep safe. Don't forget who you are." I carried it into the living room and set it gently on the carpet. I didn't open it right away. I turned off the television that had been playing some cooking show on mute and dimmed the lights until only the lamp behind the couch remained on. The whole room shifted into something quieter, sadder. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the silence settle. Then I lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of old photos, birthday cards, and journals from my teenage years. I reached for the journals first. The pages were yellowed, but the words still shouted from the ink, scrawled frustrations, lonely thoughts, things I never dared say out loud. I read through a few entries, each one taking me back to nights I spent crying into my pillow while Elric snuck out and came home wasted, only to be met with a kiss on the forehead. "Boys will be boys," Mom would say, brushing it off, even when he reeked of beer and poor decisions. In one photograph, I saw myself at 16, wearing my high school debate medal. I'd won second place at state. I remember standing in the kitchen, medal still around my neck, waiting for someone to notice. Mom had glanced up from stirring the stew and said, "That's nice, honey. Can you check the laundry?" Meanwhile, Elric got a standing ovation in our living room just for passing his driver's test after failing it twice. That kind of stuff eats at you, not all at once, but slowly, like rust. Another flash of memory hit me. Dad standing at the foot of the stairs, red-faced, yelling because I questioned whether I'd really been accidentally left off the family vacation plans. I was 23, working a second job to pay off student loans, and somehow still the problem child for asking too many questions. That was always my sin, asking, pointing out what didn't sit right. And that's when his belt or his shoe usually came flying, never in full sight of anyone else, just enough to bruise without witnesses. I learned young to be quiet, to keep my head down. But as I sat there now, in my own living room, surrounded by these pieces of a life I'd tried to outgrow, I realized the silence hadn't protected me. It had only trained them to believe I'd never fight back. Near the bottom of the box was a bundle of letters tied with an old silk ribbon. They were from Aunt Vivian, the only person who ever treated me like I mattered. She was the one who helped me secure the down payment for the beach condo, slipping me checks. "Just because," she always said, "this place is your anchor, Kaylin. Never let them talk you out of it." The top letter was dated almost 8 years ago. Her handwriting, though fading, still danced across the page with force. "They will come for what's yours one day. Mark my words. You've always been their scapegoat, and Elric their excuse. Don't let your silence be the reason they win." I read that line over and over until my throat tightened. Vivian knew. She'd always known. And I had ignored every warning, convinced myself things would eventually balance out if I just stayed calm and reasonable. I sat on the floor a while longer, gripping the letter like a lifeline. Then I stood up, grabbed my keys, and slipped on a light jacket. The sky outside had turned inky blue, the city humming in that quiet way it does after rush hour. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The drive to the condo took about an hour, traffic light this late. My palms gripped the wheel tightly, and I barely noticed the music playing. I parked a block away, behind a row of palm trees that half covered the front lawn. From where I sat in the car, I could see silhouettes moving through the windows. Music thumped softly through the walls. Laughter echoed across the street. Elric had people over, again. I counted at least 9 heads. A party on a weeknight, in a home he hadn't earned, in a space that used to smell like my vanilla candles and sun-drenched bookshelves. Now it looked like a frat house. Beer cans on the railing, loud voices, people shouting his name. "Hey, Elric! Man, this place is a vibe!" Vibe. My God. I stayed in the car, engine off, hands resting in my lap. I could feel the sting behind my eyes, but I didn't let the tears fall. They'd always said I was too sensitive. Maybe I was. But that night, watching strangers dance on floors I'd scrubbed clean after hurricanes and sleepless nights, I finally saw it for what it was. My silence had made me their easiest victim, and it was time to end it. And my first step wasn't confrontation. It was infiltration. By the time the sun came up, I had already showered, dressed, and packed a small tote with what looked like an innocent collection of personal items, photo frames, a couple of books, a throw blanket I had left at the condo. To anyone watching, it would seem like I was just trying to collect my things and move on. But I knew better. The drive to the beach felt heavier than the night before. The morning light was unforgiving, illuminating every turn of the road and every thought I didn't want to confront. When I pulled up in front of the condo, I paused for a moment. It didn't look like mine anymore. Even from the outside, I could see the curtains had been changed. Gaudy, heavy drapes where my airy linen ones used to be. It was strange how quickly a place could lose its soul. Lorraine opened the door before I could knock twice. She didn't even try to hide her disdain. "What are you doing here, Kaylin?" Her tone was the same clipped voice she used when I was a teenager coming home past curfew. "I came to get some of my things," I said evenly, keeping my tone polite. "Just a few personal items." She crossed her arms, blocking the doorway for a moment, like she needed me to feel unwelcome before stepping aside. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said. Inside, the air smelled like stale beer and cheap cologne. My chest tightened. My decor, the pale blues, the soft whites, the little touches that made the space mine, were gone. In their place, Elric's chaos. Piles of dirty laundry, mismatched furniture, bottles on every surface. The kitchen counter was covered with crumbs, and I spotted a small bag of something that wasn't flour, half tucked under a pizza box. I forced myself to breathe evenly as I walked from room to room, clutching my tote like a shield. Every step felt like an intrusion into my own life. They weren't just living here. They were erasing me. "You don't need to snoop," Lorraine said sharply from the doorway as I stepped into what used to be my bedroom. "It's Elric's place now. Get used to it." I ignored her, casually setting my phone down on the dresser, camera already recording, while I sorted through my belongings. I took slow, deliberate photographs of everything, the damages, the drug paraphernalia, even Lorraine sitting smugly in what used to be my favorite chair as though she owned the place. I heard the front door slam, followed by Elric's voice. Well, look who decided to visit." He swaggered in, eyes glazed, his smirk wider than his face could hold. "You like what I've done with the place?" I turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral. "It looks different." He laughed, that hollow, mocking sound I'd heard my whole life. "This isn't your house anymore. Get used to it." Lorraine chimed in from behind him. "Don't drag this out, Kaylin. You're making things worse for yourself." And that's when I felt it, the rage simmering, threatening to boil over. But I didn't let it. I steadied myself, then spoke in the calmest voice I could muster. "You've mistaken my silence for consent. That ends today." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything I'd said to them in years. Lorraine blinked, momentarily thrown off. Elric just scoffed, muttering something under his breath about me being dramatic. I grabbed a couple of sentimental items off the shelf, an old photo album, a vase from Aunt Vivienne, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to see what they'd do next. If they believed I was backing down, they'd get sloppy. As I walked toward the door, Lorraine let out a small laugh, dismissive and sharp, the kind meant to cut. But she didn't notice the tiny camera I'd left behind on the bookshelf, hidden between two tacky knickknacks Elric had probably stolen from a thrift store. And the footage I gathered would soon reveal more than I imagined. By the time I got back to my townhouse, the sky was already fading into a dull evening gray, and the air had that heaviness that always seems to linger before a storm. I dropped my bag on the couch and went straight to my laptop. My fingers trembled as I plugged in the small camera and opened the files. At first, I couldn't bring myself to press play. I sat there staring at the frozen thumbnail. Lorraine in my living room, legs crossed like she was on a throne, until my own reflection in the screen looked back at me, hollow-eyed and exhausted. I pressed play. The first few minutes were mundane. Lorraine shuffling around, arranging my coffee table like it was her own. She was on the phone with someone, bragging. "Finally, we got the condo. It's been such a headache, but it's ours now," she said, her voice dripping with smugness. She even laughed as she added, "Kaylin won't fight. She never does." "She knows her place." My jaw clenched. Then came the part that made my stomach twist. Lorraine turned the phone toward her face. A video call. My mother's face appeared on the screen, grainy but clear enough to make out every condescending smirk. "She's pathetic," my mother said, her voice sharp and cutting. "She never amounted to anything. You'd think by her age she'd have more to show than a little condo." Lorraine chuckled, nodding along like some obedient disciple. "Exactly. And she should be grateful we let her keep that tiny apartment. She doesn't deserve more than that." I could hear another voice in the background, faint but unmistakable, my father. He was laughing. "Teach her her place," he said. "She's always been too big for her britches." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it came out in a shaky gasp. My hand went numb around the mouse. I had expected betrayal. I had prepared myself for it. But hearing their voices, my parents, people who were supposed to protect me, mock me like I was some kind of joke, that pierced deeper than anything. Something in me snapped. I stood up abruptly, knocking my glass of water off the table. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound jolting me out of the fog I'd been in. I stared at the shards for a second, then grabbed one and hurled it at the wall with a primal scream. The crash echoed in the small room, louder than I'd expected, and then there was only silence. I slid down to the floor, my back against the wall, and cried. Not the quiet, dignified tears I was used to. This was ugly, guttural, raw. Every insult, every dismissal, every time I'd swallowed my pain for the sake of keeping the peace, came rushing back like a tidal wave. For a fleeting moment, I thought about giving up, walking away. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was all I'd ever be. Maybe I should just let them win. I remembered what my therapist once told me. Sometimes peace means walking away from the battle. But then my eyes landed on the framed photo sitting on my bookshelf. My grandmother, Vivienne, smiling at me in that way she always did, like she knew I was stronger than I believed, the woman who had given me the down payment for that condo, the only person in my family who ever saw me for who I was. I stood up and walked over to the photo. "They think I'm done?" I whispered, my voice hoarse but steady. "They have no idea who I am." I grabbed the silk scarf she had given me years ago, the same one I'd tucked away in a drawer after the funeral, too painful to look at. I wrapped it around my wrist like armor, like she was with me again. I could almost hear her voice. Don't let them take what's yours. Something shifted in me. The tears dried, replaced by a sharp, focused resolve. I sat back down at my desk and began gathering everything I could. The property deeds, old emails, every financial document I'd ever saved. I opened a spreadsheet and started mapping out my next steps, making a list of who I needed to contact, what I needed to prove. My hands moved quickly now, purposeful. Every click, every keystroke felt like a small act of defiance. This wasn't about a condo anymore. This was about every time they'd diminished me, every time they'd erased me, every piece of me they'd stolen and claimed as theirs. I glanced at my grandmother's photo again, the scarf snug around my wrist, and whispered, "This is war." And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't just fighting for a condo anymore. I was reclaiming every piece of myself they'd stolen. And the next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with one goal: take everything back. Meredith's office was tucked inside an old brick building downtown, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. She'd been my company's legal counsel once, and I trusted her more than anyone else I could think of. Meredith was the type of woman who exuded calm authority. Silver hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose, every word deliberate. "Kaylin," she said, ushering me in, "you look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I admitted, sinking into the chair across from her desk. "I need you to look at something." I handed her the stack of documents I'd gathered last night. Deeds, bank statements, that cursed power of attorney, form my father had used years ago when I'd been hospitalized after surgery. I watched her expression carefully as she skimmed through them, occasionally making small notes. Finally, she looked up. "They used this old power of attorney to transfer the title," she said, tapping the paper. "But here's the thing, they never had the legal right to do so for this property. It's still in your name." The words hit me like a rush of cold air. "So I still own it?" "Yes," Meredith said, leaning back. "But ownership on paper isn't enough. If they've changed the locks and taken occupancy, you need to act fast. If this drags on, it'll become a bigger, more expensive mess. We can file for an injunction immediately." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Immediate action. That made sense. But something in me held back. "Not yet," I said slowly. Her brow furrowed. "Not yet. Kaylin, every day you wait makes this harder." "I know," I said, steadying my voice. "But I need them to hear me first. One last time, face to face. After that, if they don't listen, we go to war." Meredith studied me for a moment before sighing. "You've always been too forgiving," she said softly. "Yeah, but if you do this, go in knowing exactly what you want to say. No second guessing." "I know exactly what I want to say," I replied. By the time I left her office, the sun was low, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could see my knuckles whiten. I drove in silence, rehearsing every word in my head. That evening, I pulled up in front of my parents' house without calling first. The place looked exactly as I remembered. White siding, blue shutters, the porch light already on like some kind of invitation. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't for a long time. I walked up the steps and rang the bell. When my mother opened the door, surprise flickered across her face before settling into that familiar, cold smile. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said. "I need to talk to all of you," I said. My tone was calm, but every nerve in my body was buzzing. She stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into the dining room. The table was set for dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Elric was already seated, slouched in his chair with a smug grin, and my father was at the head of the table, eyes narrowing as I entered. The room went silent. "You have 7 days," I said, planting my hands on the back of an empty chair. 7 days to get out of my condo. After that, the next time we talk, it'll be in court. Elric snorted. "Oh, here we go," he said, leaning back with a mock laugh. You think you can just waltz in here and make demands? My father slammed his fork down, the clang echoing through the room. You ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you, you're threatening us now? Lorraine didn't miss a beat. She let out a laugh, sharp and mocking. Oh, please, Kaylin, what are you going to do? Sue your own family? Go ahead, you'll lose. You always do. For a moment, my hands shook against the chair. I wanted to yell, to throw every insult back in their faces, but I didn't. I looked at each of them slowly, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. This isn't a threat, I said, my voice calm but cutting. It's a promise. No one spoke, not even Elric, who now looked less amused and more annoyed, shifting in his seat. I straightened up, adjusting the scarf wrapped around my wrist. Vivian's scarf. My battle flag. 7 days, I repeated, then turned toward the door. As I walked out, I could feel their eyes burning into my back, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew how this would end. 7 days. I'd given them 7 days, and I already knew exactly how this would end. So, on the 8th day, I didn't show up at their door. The sheriff did. I parked a block away, my fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, watching the condo I had worked years to buy, now dressed up like some cheap weekend rental. Even from here, I could see the curtains I had chosen, soft cream linen, replaced with garish red drapes that weren't mine. That small detail made my stomach twist more than I expected. They hadn't just stolen the condo, they were erasing me from it. 2 sheriff's deputies walked up the pathway, their boots heavy against the wooden steps. They knocked firmly. Lorraine opened the door in a silk robe, clearly irritated at the interruption. The moment she saw the uniforms, her face twisted. "What is this?" she snapped. "Ma'am," the lead deputy said evenly, "this property is legally owned by Kaylin Givens. You are here without her consent. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises." Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me? This is my house." "My parents gave it to me. You can't just—" "Ma'am," the deputy cut in, unfazed, "we have court orders. You can take any personal belongings that are yours, but you need to leave. Now." I stepped out of my car and walked up the pathway slowly. Lorraine's eyes went wide when she saw me, then narrowed to slits. "Oh, of course," she hissed. "You didn't have the nerve to face me yourself, so you sent the cops." "I didn't send them," I said, my voice steady. "I brought them. This is my home, and you knew that." From inside, I heard a clatter, and then my father's voice bellowing. A moment later, he appeared, red-faced and furious. "You can't do this!" he roared at the deputies. "We're her family!" I took a step forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You should have remembered that when you threw a shoe at my face." His mouth opened, then shut again, like he couldn't decide which excuse to throw at me first. Lorraine, still desperate, pulled out her phone and held it up, pointing it toward me. "Everyone, look at this!" she shouted into her camera. "My daughter is kicking her own family out of their home. Can you believe this? Look at what she's doing." I glanced at the camera, then directly at her. "Yes," I said clearly, "and the world should know why." The deputies didn't bother hiding their discomfort at her theatrics, but they stayed professional. "Ma'am," one said, "you need to comply, or we will escort you out." Lorraine's voice rose into a shrill pitch, but the words blurred together as the deputies started moving her and the others toward the door. My father kept arguing, his face redder than I'd ever seen it, but even he couldn't outshout the law. Elric wasn't even there. Apparently he'd disappeared when things got serious. Finally, the last of them were escorted out, Lorraine still shouting about betrayal and what family means. The door closed, and for the first time in months, silence filled the condo. I stood there for a long moment before stepping inside. The smell hit me immediately. A mix of my old lavender candles buried under layers of cheap perfume and cigarette smoke. My heart clenched. They had tried to overwrite everything I'd built here, but some pieces of me still lingered. I walked through each room slowly. My couch was still in the living room, though stained. My bookshelves emptied. The kitchen counters sticky, but my grandmother's teacup, the one she'd left me, sat untouched in the corner, as if waiting for me. I walked to the kitchen, slipped the scarf from my wrist and placed it on the counter. It wasn't just a scarf anymore. It was a flag, a declaration. This wasn't just about a condo. It was about taking back every piece of me they'd tried to strip away. But I knew they weren't done with me, and I wasn't done with them either. And 2 days later, I received a thick envelope that made my blood run cold. It was waiting for me on my kitchen counter when I came home from work, the oversized manila package stamped with a law firm's logo I didn't recognize. I ripped it open with trembling fingers and scanned the first page. My stomach dropped. They were suing me, Lorraine and my parents, for wrongful eviction and emotional damages. And as if that wasn't ridiculous enough, they had attached a request for a temporary restraining order against me. I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so on brand for them, that my first reaction was dark amusement. But the deeper I read, the worse it got. They hadn't just filed paperwork. They were dragging my name through the mud. Enclosed were printed screenshots of Lorraine's latest social media performance, her crying on camera, makeup smeared, claiming I'd left her homeless and thrown her out on the street. The comments below were full of strangers calling me a monster, greedy, heartless. My parents had gone further, telling neighbors and family friends that I stole the condo out of pure selfishness and abandoned them when they needed me most. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a smear campaign. I stood there in my kitchen, envelope dangling from my hand, the walls closing in. For a moment, I considered calling Meredith, my lawyer, to tell her I couldn't do it anymore. That maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe peace was worth giving up everything. Then my eyes drifted to the photo on my mantel. My grandmother, smiling softly, her hand on my shoulder the day I closed on the condo. That woman had given me everything she could so I could stand on my own. And here they were, trying to strip me down to nothing. No, not this time. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Meredith guided me through every piece of paperwork. I pulled bank statements, tax receipts, emails, anything that painted the full picture. And when I walked into that downtown courthouse, I wasn't just defending a piece of property. I was defending my name. Lorraine and my parents were already there, dressed like they were headed to a Sunday sermon, sitting at the plaintiff's table with their attorney. Lorraine didn't look at me, but I could see the smirk tugging at her lips, like she thought this was already won. The hearing began, and their lawyer painted me as a villain, a vindictive daughter who heartlessly discarded her family and abused her power. I let him speak. I let Lorraine dab her fake tears with a tissue, and then it was my turn. I walked up calmly, wearing my grandmother's scarf around my neck, not on my wrist like before. It wasn't a bandage anymore. It was armor. Your Honor, I began, handing over a neatly organized binder. This property was purchased solely with my funds. I have paid every tax, every fee, every bill, and while my family claims I gifted it to them, this document, I held up a notarized agreement, states otherwise. I read it aloud, clear and steady. This property shall remain under Kaylin Given's sole ownership, regardless of family occupancy. The room went still. Behind Lorraine, my father slammed his hand against the bench. You ungrateful little... The judge's gavel cracked against the wood. One more outburst, he said sharply, and you'll be held in contempt. Lorraine's face blanched. She knew the show was over. And then came my final strike. A USB drive containing Lorraine's own live stream from eviction day, where she'd screamed at deputies while admitting the condo wasn't hers. They claim emotional damages, I said, but here's footage of them mocking me as they occupied my property without permission. It was the mic drop moment I'd been waiting for. The judge didn't deliberate long. The motion for wrongful eviction is dismissed. The request for a restraining order is denied. The court affirms Ms. Givens as the sole legal owner of the property. Just like that, it was done. When I stepped out of the courthouse, The California sun felt different, warmer, lighter. I untied the scarf from my neck and let it hang loose. It didn't feel like a shackle anymore. It felt like survival. Walking away from that courthouse, I knew this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about never letting them write my story again. A week later, I stood in front of the condo, keys in hand. The salty wind off the ocean felt colder than I remembered, cutting through the fabric of my sweater as if to remind me that this place never really belonged to me the way I once thought it did. The building was quiet now. Lorraine and my parents were long gone, forced to comply with the court's ruling. No yelling, no mockery spilling from the balcony, no cheap perfume fighting against the faint scent of my old lavender candles. Just silence. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The emptiness hit me first. I'd thought I was ready for this, but the sight of those bare walls, stripped of the furniture and little personal touches I'd once obsessed over, made my chest ache. This condo had been my dream once, proof that I'd made it, that I could stand on my own after years of being told I wasn't enough. Now it was just hollow space with ghosts lingering in every corner. I walked slowly through each room, letting my hand graze the surfaces I used to care for so meticulously. The kitchen counter, where I once sipped coffee with my mom, back when I believed her visits were about love and not judgment. The living room, where Lorraine had promised she'd visit often, though what she really meant was, use it whenever I want. My bedroom, where I'd once collapsed in exhaustion, thinking ownership meant security. Every step felt like pulling off another bandage, raw but necessary. I paused by the window facing the ocean. This had been my favorite view, the one I used to stand at for hours, convincing myself the crashing waves meant something like peace. Now it just reminded me of how much I'd sacrificed to buy this place, thinking maybe then my family would finally see me as worthy. My therapist's words came back to me. Closure isn't about revenge. It's about deciding what still deserves space in your life. For years, this condo was everything. My status symbol, my fortress, my desperate attempt at proving I belonged. But staring out at that ocean, I realized it was just a building, and I didn't need it anymore. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my realtor's contact. My thumb hovered for a moment before I tapped. When she answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "List it," I said simply. But I wasn't done. I met with Meredith that afternoon. We sat in her office, sunlight spilling across the stack of documents between us, and I told her my plan. Set up a trust. A portion of the sale proceeds would go to fund a local community legal aid program, the very one that helped me when I was scrambling to protect what was mine. She smiled as she jotted down the details. "That's a powerful way to close this chapter," she said. And it was. 2 weeks later, I stood at a small fundraising event in a modest community center downtown, surrounded by people who understood what it meant to fight for dignity with limited means. They asked me to say a few words, and though I don't usually like speaking in front of crowds, I felt ready. "I used to think owning this condo meant I'd finally earned my family's love," I said, my voice steady but softer than usual. "But love you have to buy isn't love at all. This condo gave me freedom once. But now I want it to give that same freedom to others who need a way out." The room was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy kind of quiet I'd felt in my parents' dining room. It was full of understanding, of people who knew what I meant without me needing to explain every scar. That night, I came back to the condo one last time. The paperwork was nearly done, and the realtor would take over from here. I walked through every room again, slower this time, like I was saying goodbye to someone I'd loved and lost. When I reached the kitchen counter, I untied the scarf from around my shoulders. My grandmother's scarf, the one that had been wound tightly around my wrist when I needed strength. I laid it gently on the cool surface, no longer a symbol of pain, no longer a battle flag, just a reminder of survival. I placed the keys beside it and exhaled. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't vindication. It was something quieter, something freer. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to prove my worth to people who'd never wanted to see it. I wasn't holding on to a building, hoping it would make me whole. I closed the door behind me, hearing the click of the lock echo down the hallway like a final note. I thought losing my family meant losing myself, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. But maybe, just maybe, I finally found me. Have you ever had to let go of something, or someone, to truly find peace? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone,